The African Union Commission chairman has decided to walk out on a very thin branch, standing up for South Africa, saying its exclusion from the G20 makes no sense whatsoever. In fact, it makes all the sense in the world. Not a single African economy even remotely comes close to justifying inclusion in the 20 largest economies of the planet. The inclusion was a politeness, as was the invitation to the G20 for the AU recently. The AU, despite being a non-player, was invited to participate in the G20 out of consideration for the developing world. And rather than be grateful for that, the chairman of the African Union Commission has decided to insult the United States and try to cause diplomatic chaos. News 24 reports today that the G20 without South Africa makes no sense, according to AU chief. And he promises he will lobby the U.S. Well, thank you, but we're not really interested in your lobbying. The chairman of the African Union Commission, Mohamed Ali Youssef, has condemned the U.S. exclusion of South Africa from G20, suggested that the bloc would lobby Washington to allow Pretoria to represent the continent at the Leaders' Summit later this year in Miami. Of course, the problem with this, ladies and gentlemen, is that the African Union would not exist were it not for the generous donations given by the European Union and by the United States over the past couple decades. It doesn't fund itself. It accomplishes virtually nothing on the continent. Its 2050 maritime strategy is moribund, even though it was a brilliant strategy, because there were no resources and there's no sovereignty over the member states. Its efforts to stamp out disease have been fruitless. Its creation of bodies has simply led to comfy jobs for bureaucrats, not for action or substance across Africa. Now, I'm not just some commentator saying this, sitting here on the sidelines. I worked at the African Union. I've seen what happens there. I've seen what goes on behind the scenes. And I know how things are handled. And it's a shame. The African Union has great potential, not as a body similar to the European Union, which has swallowed the sovereignty of its member states and impoverished and imprisoned its own citizens. But the African Union has the ability, if only it would exercise it. On a rare occasion, when the Ebola outbreak took place in West Africa, after dithering for months, they were convinced to actually take action and look for volunteers across the continent to go there and make a difference. One time, the AU stepped in and did its job. But the AU has done nothing about piracy off the coast of Africa. The AU has fruitless efforts in Somalia and many other places. So the African Union now trying to pressure or condemn the United States is a very perilous decision. And they should rethink this. If Trump had time to deal with this, they'd regret it. But let's be honest, they don't really care. South Africa is a major player in the G20. It has been very successful in hosting this summit. And the triptych that South Africa proposed really was wonderfully accepted and received by the African public opinion, generally speaking. We are not only worried, we condemn that, we reject that. This is what he said after meeting with Ronald Mullah. Well, the fact that South Africa, a major tourist nation, could manage to handle a conference doesn't make them worthy of the G20. Morocco can handle a conference. Doesn't make them worthy. That's a ridiculous assumption. And the fact that it was greeted well by the African public really isn't germane. The African public are not among the 20 largest economies in the world. This is an organization that's meant to coordinate economic policy amongst the 20 largest economies, not be a begging bowl for beggars, which is what Cyril Ramaphosa turned the G20 into during the South Africa tour. A beggar bowl, begging for debt relief so they can borrow more money, squander it again, and then beg for more money and pull the racist card when money isn't given to them. That is not the purpose of G20. This new summit will take place in Miami. The theme of sustainability development without South Africa does not make any sense. And we, the African Union, as a full member, we relied on South Africa to voice the expectations of the continent, and South Africa did it. So we will work with the next chair of the next summit so that these things cannot happen. I find it fascinating that African countries who were angry at South Africa for forcing Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma on them as the African Union chairperson, breaking the unwritten rule that regional hegemons would never chair the Organization of African Unity or the African Union, the anger that that caused in Addis Ababa suddenly is salved over. And why is that? Why is that? Well, let's take a look at where South Africa sits and see if it warrants a position in the G20. This is gross domestic product by country this year from the International Monetary Fund. Sitting at the top at nearly $33 trillion is the United States, followed by China at $21 trillion, Germany, Japan, UK. Let's work our way down. Russia, a bit higher than I expected, in 9th position. Spain, Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, Ireland, a country of just 4.5 million, 5 million people with nearly $1 trillion of GDP, $750 billion. Austria, little Austria, 623 billion. Norway, Thailand, Vietnam, Denmark, Well, there's South Africa all the way down here at number 40. Yes, at number 40. Look at that. South Africa's 40th ranked GDP. So naturally, of course, they belong in the G20, the 20 largest countries by GDP. No, they don't. They have no business there. And even if we go back and re-rank this and try to be considerate, and let's go GDP per capita. Let's see where South Africa falls there. South Africa. Let's find South Africa now. Where is South Africa? Wow, it's way down here. Much further down when you go GDP per capita. Well, there we go. All the way down here. That's a lot more than 40 rankings. Look at that. It makes all the sense in the world that South Africa is excluded from this event. Last year, on the brink of the G20 summit, their foreign minister, Ronald Lamola, went on CNN, a documentary that I was involved in which he lied about President Trump. He called President Trump the leader of global white supremacy, essentially. He said that the refugee program was white supremacy. It's not. How do you have a white supremacy program that includes coloreds, Indians, and blacks? It really shows the ignorance of the man or his outright propaganda. And the insults against President Trump continued throughout the G20, with Ramaphosa continually mocking him in private sessions and in public, and mocking the United States. South Africa has no business whatsoever under the ANC of participating in the G20. None whatsoever. And here the African Union, a beggar's bowl that survives on the handouts from the European Union and the United States, to condemn the United States, I caution you, you're treading on very thin ice. If you think the money is important to keep your bureaucrats fed in Addis, then perhaps you ought to focus on fixing Africa instead of insulting America. What say you, South Africa, Africa, the world? I think a lot of us had enough of this nonsense. Ungrateful people at the African Union.